Hey everybody, welcome back to your favorite sleep aid. Today it's Commonwealth time. Commonwealth might be my favorite coalition. I would not call it the strongest coalition by any means. In fact, it has some, relatively speaking, for coalitions, relatively glaring weaknesses. Now, specifically, I mean, compared to coalitions, when you compare to nations, it's not nearly as glaring as nations have. Obviously, if you look at, I don't know, Denmark has obvious like holes, but when you take a look at coalitions, Commonwealth has some glaring ones. It's not the only one. Like Scandi has some very obvious ones, right? But for Commonwealth, it's a lot more of like a play style thing. Like when it comes to individual roles of units, there's no real hole, but it's just speed. The deck is just slow. Now, that being said, Commonwealth Moto is actually quite a strong deck and one of my favorite Moto decks, even though I usually don't like Moto decks. But especially Unspec or any non-Moto deck tend to be inflexible and awkward at times that many other decks don't do. Now, let's go through it, shall we? CVs, I mean, helicopter, infantry CV, and all that, you know the drill. Warrior is pretty decent, comes actually at 5 per card thanks to the 15% availability bonus that Commonwealth nowadays has. Pretty solid CV, 3 armor, front and side, that's 75% of all the sides, of course. Pretty fast as well, medium optics, and a not great autocannon, but an autocannon to defend itself. If you want like a decently survivable CV that, you know, also has some decent availability, Warrior is a very solid option. Chieftain is one of the heavier tank CVs you get, but it is very slow. And you'd notice that something like a Leopard 2 or an Abrams CV are just multiple times better simply because they can actually dodge stuff, whereas the Chieftain just won't. Especially when it's in a forest. Chieftains are just sitting ducks. Good luck trying to evade anything. That being said, of course, unless you're getting cluster bombed or something, speed not as important against something like high explosive artillery as the entire armor is, right? So it's still like a tanky, very tanky CV. And out of all the tank CVs in here, I'd probably always go for a Chieftain either way, right? Because a Leopard 1, even though it is a good chunk faster, the lower armor, especially the side armor, you will notice that. British CV, of course, has Lynx H7, a very good rocket bot helicopter, very commonly seen. Other than that, there's nothing particularly special, although the Aslev does deserve a very honorable mention. 5 per card, 2 front, 2 side, and wheeled with good off-road speed. Also a good, solid, like high-ish availability per card CV that fills a similar role to the Warrior, where you want something somewhat tanky that can also move. Now, somewhat tanky might be an exaggeration, but keep in mind, against high explosive damage, 2 armor reduces the incoming damage by 60%, right? That's quite a bit. Whereas 1 armor does nothing. And then, of course, very supply trucks. Not a huge amount of choices for the trucks. I always prefer the 30-point ones. One thing to point out is the Stalwart actually, for 15 point supply truck, is just objectively better. It has the same availability, like 12, right? But is faster, has better off-road speed, is amphibious, and also has 10 HP. That is something very important to keep in mind. Usually only the 30-point trucks onwards have 10 HP, as well as the MTLB and the Dutch AMX supply truck. I think other than that, only 30-point onwards you get 10 HP, which is by no means irrelevant. So that's actually also a solid contender, but I still prefer the 30-point ones. Infantry. Assault Pioneers. I mean, the Pioneers. Funnily enough, I actually kind of prefer, personally speaking, the Flamer squads to have ideally SMGs. Well, for one, SMGs are actually just better in CQC. Well, specifically in town fights. But the other thing is, sometimes when I attack move with the Pioneers, or like Flamers, every now and then it's very, very rare, right? And a very niche scenario that ultimately doesn't really matter. But sometimes it happens that they're in range of the primary weapon, but not in range of the napalm, of the flamethrower. So they only fire with the primary weapon while being barely out of range of the flamethrower. Now, of course, it can still happen with SMGs, which has 455 meters, but it happens less often. Or alternatively, they give their position away from like a town or something a bit too early, etc., etc. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter. And one thing to keep in mind is the minigun transport is just bad. Right, let me show this to you. Right, it has a 50 RPM, which is not that high. Right, compared it to basically any autocannon you should compare this to, because an autocannon also has 180. Right, in theory, the damage output should be that bad. Let's just compare this to like a KFE-25 with a KBA-25, which is like a very average, okay, I would say above average autocannon. Maybe the ZSC-90, I think, has 60 RPM. Oh, that's the... Sorry, 90, not 60. Yep, it has 60 RPM, right? Which is already on like somewhat above average. So let's just say the minigun has average rate of fire. It's basically half the rate of fire of the RH-202 autocannon, like on the Marder 1, or its stat clones, like on the VAP T20 or the BVP M80, right? 50 RPM, not the worst. Also, like a pretty relatively long salvo length of 10. Not too shabby thus far. And also 1 AG. But then you have to keep in mind, well, base accuracy is 20%, which is the same base accuracy as the highest rate of fire autocannons, right? Where they make up the low accuracy with the high rate of fire. But they don't have set high rate of fire. Okay, that's not so great. Then you keep in mind the range of that thing. 1,000 meters. That is nothing. You're so quickly in range of any kind of infantry-based AT, and with one armor you get one shot very quickly. Okay, that is huge issue number one. The damage output and engagement range, which essentially affect damage output because you can't fire in as many situations, is actually quite bad, right? That's issue number one. Issue number two. That minigun does not have the AoE tag. Now, that is something that the game doesn't really explain very well, I think. Yeah, the AoE tag doesn't really display it. Basically, what AoE effectively does is it allows you to shoot at an enemy target no matter what armor it has. If you have an HE-only weapon without the AoE tag, which is basically just like infantry small arms, you can only fire at 0 and 1 armor vehicles. And against 1 armor vehicles, you deal like 10% of the damage. So the damage output against anything that isn't infantry is either just nil or very, very low, right? Because unless you're like fighting like a Patriot or an infantry Jeepsy or something, it's unlikely that you're ever gonna fire any high value targets that aren't infantry. And even then, they're at maximum like 40 points or 35. So that also essentially means that there's a lot fewer targets for you to shoot at. So, for one, you can pretty much only fight infantry, and two, your damage output is not very high. Then you compare this to something like the NM135, the Norwegian thing for 10 points, which has a proper autocannon for the same price, and a secondary MG even. It's just not very good. It's just not very good. It's all that needs to be said. Yeah, okay, blowpipe, they're bad, of course. Canadian Airborne and Airborne 90. 90 are solid, they're okay, they're not great. You see them sometimes because they're available in mech. One of the few helicopter-borne infantry in mech that you get in this mech. The other one, most importantly, being special forces, so you still don't see them that often. But sometimes you want like the 875 meters. They're very nice to have, and I'm pretty solid against infantry. Assault rifle is basic, but it's fine. A mini-me, the best MG you could get. very, very solid. Canadian Airborne Base, they're fine. They're not great. They have a battle rifle, which is actually better most of the time than an assault rifle. And the Cargos M2 is fine for 20 points. The C2 is not so great. And the other issue is that transports, they're nothing outstanding. Bison is 2 front to side, which is very good for wheels, but only a basic MG, not a heavy MG. You don't really see those because for 20 points you also get Commandos 90. Canadian rifles, they're okay. The infantry squad itself is actually pretty solid. Battle rifle, law, and a basic MG. Transport are just very basic again. And then once you get into the 10-point transports that are just just APCs, right? No IFVs. That's when you're like, it's not really worth running them anymore. 85 variant for free gets the A4 law, but with worse availability. And you get a TH495, which is a solid IFV. It's not the best because it's kind of too good to be at 15 points. But at 20 points, it's, I wouldn't say underwhelming, but not, let's say not outstanding. You see every now and then a car of those being brought. It's alright. I guess medium optics, 75 km off-road speed, solid autocannon and 3 armor. It is still good. It is good. Worth using, but not a must-have. Commandos base, they're basically copies of Canadian Airborne, and except they're actually worse because they have Brennan L4, which is sometimes there's variants of MGs essentially with the same rate of fire pattern, but you gain an additional range step, but lose 10% accuracy and a bit of stabilizer, which is not worth it, basically ever. You never make up like 10% base accuracy with the 105 meters extra range, and the extra engagement range you get from that is pretty much irrelevant. Because most of the time you want to be fighting when you can fire with your primary weapon as well. Minus 90 on the other hand are amazing. They are one of the few, if not only, squads that how should I put this? Kept their non-standard primary weapon. There were a few more of that sort, like some carbines had a similar fire pattern and all that. Commandos 90 were spared from that, presumably because Eugene forgot. And then I think most people essentially agreed that while yes, they are probably too good at 20 points for what they do, they're not a huge problem because, well, outside of Blue Mac back then, nowadays it's not that big of a deal, because mainly Commonwealth benefits from it, which aren't top tier. Now, whether that is still the case or not, etc., is a whole different discussion, but that's why they were, I believe at least, more or less left how they are. As for their actual stats, if you just take a look at the primary weapons, they're essentially, like, look at this, right? Rate of fire of the primary weapon. Accuracy is the same as on an assault rifle, but rate of fire is just higher. Right? Significantly higher. Almost on the level of an elite assault rifle, but having no accuracy though. That's essentially how you could look at this. If you compare this to an SMG, let's say Gurkhas, it's SMG rate of fire, but assault rifle accuracy, which is how a lot of the old carbines worked. For example, well, how the G11, for example, still kind of works, except it has even better stabilizer and accuracy than assault rifles, but that's a whole different discussion. But yeah, they were one of the few squads that got left with that. And they're amazing. They're incredibly good. They also have the best MG available. And for 20 points, a very good anti-tank weapon. They have good wheel transport option. Not so great 5-pointer. The 3050 is fine because there's 2 MGs, one of them being a 50 cal, but only 1 armor. At the end of the day, it's better though, because if they also had a really good 5-pointer, it would be problematic. Or even more problematic than they arguably already are. Bigger space. If you want to spam 9 infantry, they're probably better because while they also only have 1 armor transports, their 5-pointer has a second MG. And at this point, having a Brenn L4 versus the C2A1 or the C6, it's not that big of a deal on 9 infantry. Tigers 90 are an odd one. Funnily enough, they have the same primary weapon as the Commandos 90, but they have fixed stats, let's call it. They have the Mini-Me, which is interesting because they're the only non-shock squad that gets the Mini-Me. And they also get a CQC tag as one of two, I want to say, line infantry squads. Usually line infantry squads don't get CQC tags on their MGs, Diggerstein being an exception. Practically, they're not really worth 15 points. I tried them every now and then, a couple of times. It's not good enough of an upgrade to pay 5 points while having still an A for long. At the end of the day, having CQC is not that big of a deal. Compared to Jäger, having a 10% extra accuracy over the range compared to the MG3, and also lower suppression to be fair. While it is an upgrade, it's still not that great. Plus, compared to Jäger, again, you have a worse anti-tank weapon. They're interesting, but practically they don't really work too well. Eric's, if you really want some dead tanks in close ranges, they're fun to use. I think in mech, maybe even in Moto, though in Moto you get Highlanders, so probably not. Can be worth using. I wouldn't use them in unspec. You don't get a lot of them, and they're, I wouldn't say niche in that sense, because having Erics around is pretty much always good, even if you don't, there's no tank to kill, it's still quite some range you get. But you quickly run out of them, and in certain situations they just don't do anything, right? Against infantry, even though they can't fire at infantry, they're very, very weak, especially when you compare them to like Carl Gustav squads or something, but that's fine. Right? They have like a dedicated role. They're like actual like short range anti-tank killers, and sometimes you kind of want that, especially because, and it might sound weird, infantry based AT on this deck can be awkward. But usually you're very, very good when it comes to like lots of light vehicle spam, right? Because you often have -90 around, and the Carl Gustav M2 one-shots anything up to 4 armor with pretty good consistency. It can sometimes be awkward against quite heavy tanks, because while you have the Law 80 on like 5 different squads, it quote-unquote only has 22 AP, and the squads themselves aren't always like, you don't really want to put them in your deck most of the time, which might sound weird because the Law 80 for 15 points should be very, very good, but I still personally at least find Fusilier 90s awkward. And again, power troopers 90s aren't particularly bad, but the transports are, except for the links, it might just be a me thing. But yeah, Eric, they can be fine. I wouldn't recommend them in unspec because you don't get a lot of value out of a single card, and in unspec you have only 5 cards. And in Moto, you probably want to go for Highlander. Fusilier Space, only real reasons to run them if you want some warriors, or maybe a cheap H7, I suppose. The warriors, I think they get better for each tier, right? I think the base warrior is the worst one. Warrior 90 is fine. The Rowden just has horrible like stats, right? If you look at the warrior, compared to like a Bradley, which has a buffed autocannon, but the Bushmaster is still not like top tier. Like 30 RPM. It used to be higher than the Bushmaster. The Bushmaster used to be 27.27, I think. But then you have to keep in mind, on top of it just being not the greatest, it also has no stabilizer. A good base accuracy and actually decent AP, but really low rate of fire, and that's not great at all. And again, no stabilizer is quite a big deal, especially for autocannon, like cheap autocannon spam vehicles, because sometimes you want to run down vehicles, or you want to just fast move to really be annoying, but still be able to fight. Yeah. And as such, you're probably best off running like the Milan 2, the Warrior Milan. 5 points for Milan 2 is very good. And it's a pretty good carrier, right? You need 24 AP to one-shot this at max range. So if a tank attack moves towards you, unless it's an M1A2, it will not one-shot you, assuming you're at full HP. And the difference between getting one-shot and not one-shot is obviously huge, right? So yeah, it's solid. And the Warrior 90, again, it has horrible DPS, but really good survivability. It's just mainly an anti-vehicle killer. Its AP output is fine because it has 3 AP and not 2, which a lot of other autocannons at this range and such have. That's nice, and the accuracy helps a lot as well. Against infantry, it really struggles though. Usually in 90s, again, the squad itself actually very good. The MG is not so great. It's the same rate of fire as like a Bren L4, right? Which is pretty low. It has CQC though, one of the few other squads, which is, at least somewhat helps in like close range engagements. However, the transports again are kind of the same issue. And usually, if you run Fusilier in 90s, at least that's at least when it comes to me, you want to run them in 500s because then they're like your cheap, dedicated tank killer. At which point the 5-pointer being good or bad becomes quite important, and the FV is just pretty bad, honestly. Only one armor, pretty slow, and just a basic MG. That's awkward. The Saxon is as basic as it gets, pretty much. Then if you like want to use your warrior, pretty with warriors, then they're so expensive that you can't really spam them. And a single squad, given the fact that it's line infantry, it's not going to be as consistent, not going to be as fast, not going to be as resilient. It suddenly doesn't have as much of an impact anymore. It's by no means useless, right? Even an individual Fusilier 90s here and there can be very, very strong. Don't get me wrong. But what makes them strong is that they're so cheap. Usually, if you want to run them, you probably should go for the FV or maybe the Sax if you want them fast. That's what I would recommend. Yeah, it's still a good card, don't get me wrong. But I think it just highlights Commonwealth, where an individual unit can be like very good on one hand, but then there's always like one or two things that hold it back from it being too strong, and very often also just making it feel a bit awkward. But I think that's nice. I think that's good. Gives the deck and a coalition flavor without ruining it. At least not nowadays. Gurkha Space, don't use them, please. 30 points for a Bren and just a Carl Gustav with basic transports, not great. Gurkha's 90. They're fine. They're not amazing for 30 points, especially when you compare them to like Fans Gaming at 90. Might be an extreme because they're probably the best 15-man shock squad in the game. But the nice thing is always about 50-man squads, or the best thing about them is they're very, very good like walls against tanks or heavy vehicles in forests, right? The 15 HP means a lot more damage needs to be dealt to get rid of them. They have a lot of anti-tank ammo, right? So 2 or 3 of them can do a lot, like hold off an armored push at close ranges for quite a while, or just force your opponent to not push for a while and build up forces or meat shields or something first. So that's the main role really is just forest anti-tank, in my opinion, because that's where you get the most out of the 15 HP. They can, of course, always be used for like sneaking around. They're light infantry, so they get the elite infantry speed, being shock, and light infantry essentially changes your speed to the next training speed, so to speak. Personally, I prefer them. I think the best used in the Saxon as like the main forest or heavy forest anti-tank duty. But you do notice the difference between 22, 23, or 24 AP compared to like the Apilas or the M90 Strategian. Like suddenly you don't want a double tap 15 armor, right? Double tap 15 armor, you need 23 AP like on the Apilas. Against like M84As or T72Bs or M1Ms, you do notice having only 22 and not 23 armor. So that is something to keep in mind. Highlander Space, I mean, technically they're like better than your average line Carl Gustav squad because they're light infantry, so they're faster. They're not very good. Don't bother with them. They don't get a 5-pointer either, or any great significant transports that changes the combat value. Don't bother with them. Highlanders 90 on the other hand, very good. Kind of similar to Gurkha's 90, that compared to the Eric squad, it can be like your main short or up to like somewhat medium range heavy anti-tank duty. And because with the 10 HP, they tank a lot more shots from tanks, right? Obviously, they don't have the 15 HP like the Gurkhas. But compared to the Eric squad, this being your only other Eric squad in the tank, the extra HP helps a lot. And that is really their main duty. They can be okay against infantry because they have the mini-me, but don't use them for like grinding in towns or something. They're just their main purpose is just short/medium range anti-tank. And they also have high availability than the Erics, so I usually prefer them. I wouldn't say they're a must-take, but I think they're your best anti-tank focused infantry you have. It's also nice, them being light, they can keep up with your shock squad, or alternatively just have a better chance of surviving if they're trying to run away. Yeah. I think they're the best choice for your dedicated anti-tank, so to speak. Like what your VDV 90 or your Legion 90 are in this deck, in other decks, sorry, in this deck are Highlanders 90. Manpad time, you have basically only one good manpad, and that's the Javelin, either the British or the Canadian one, it doesn't matter. It's an okay manpad, has more range than the Stinger, but it's guided, and has a good chunkless accuracy, at least compared to the Stinger C. But it's a 5 HE, and it's still manpads, right? As long as your manpad has okay accuracy and 5 or at least 4 HE, it's pretty much always good. Question is always just, can you fit it in? Which in unspec, probably not. In mech or moto probably still not because you have SAS. Mech, yes, I would recommend using them. Manpads are just, they give you a lot of coverage for very, very cheap. I think one of the most underrated type of units in the game. But at the same time, I also understand why you don't see them that often, simply because in unspec decks, hard to fit in. Go up, of course, being absolutely awful. You also have the Maw, aforementioned Carl Gustav, this squad. It's good, it's fine. Not a great transports, which is a shame. Maybe if they had a TH1 and 5, same with the Eric's, would be better, but on the other hand, maybe it would be boring if suddenly in every Commonwealth deck you saw the TH1 and 5 being used. I think Commonwealth has a decent amount of variety. Maybe not so much because Commanders 90 are kind of a must-have, and SAS probably as well. But every deck has these kind of units. Milan teams, I mean, they're Milan teams, right? You can get the British ones with the H7s, which is worth pointing out. Other than that, that's just your Milan teams. Another more Paratrooper Space, same story with base Canadian Airborne or base Gurkhas. Don't bother with them. Pretty bad weaponry. Paratroopers 90. I mean, Paratroopers and the 90 variants are basically like Gurkhas, but with 10 men instead of 15, and thus they're 5 points cheaper. Plus, they're not light, so they're normal shock speed. Paratroopers 90 are perfectly fine, solid. Kind of like Rima, instead just they have 1 less AP, which is not nothing. Also worth pointing out, the Law ID does have 10% extra accuracy over the Apila, so that is somewhat making up the 22 AP. In some instances, of course, is preferred, depending on who or what you go up against. Also worth pointing out that 50-man squads have more AT weaponry, right? You get 12 Law 80s versus 6 on the Paratroopers, which is definitely worth pointing out, especially given the 20 RPM. Pioneers, again, or like more flamers, these guys get a TH4 and 5, other than that, they're pretty basic. Alright, RBS are also an option. They're 5 men though, so they have worse stealth, but also more ammo, more range as well, but less HE. Personally, I'd go for the Javelins, because you have some other 5 HE missiles in the stack, namely the Rapiers. So the 4 versus 5 HE is quite a much bigger deal in this deck and in a lot of like Red 4 decks, where you also see a lot of 4 HE manpads. Red, of course, not being great. Royal Marine Space, again, horrible. A lot of pretty non-90s infantry in this deck is horrible because they always like the Brennel 4, which is so bad. And once more, cargo stuff, right? You also get a Buffalo. Just okay. 90s, they're fine. I'm not a fan, like a huge fan of them. 35 points for a not particularly special force. Like, it's not like they're bad, right? They have a mini-me, a great weapon. Alloy 80, very solid too. Assault rifle is fine, right? But 10 men, they're not particularly like outstanding. They're fine. And the thing is, in the decks that are available, I just never see myself losing them or like giving them a slot. SAS, quite solid. In fact, probably more often used as manpads than your other manpads in this deck. Obviously, being elite, a decent anti-infantry DPS just for their primary. You shouldn't use them in that role, but they can defend themselves at least. Very versatile, of course, having 84 and a Stinger. Very good for sneaking around, very good for your opening anti-air, especially nowadays, I should say, that they get the Saxon and the Stalwart. Helicopter transports in with the H7, or in mech, you get them in the Puma. honestly a must-have. An Anspec in the Saxon, because they're usually your best wheeled AA. The Wolverine can be inconsistent, but I still love it to death. Very, very good squad. SASR, they can also be an option for your mech helicopter drop if you don't want SAS. Other than that, on the one hand they have an SMG, essentially. On the other hand, they have a very basic MG. They also only get the Cargosav M3 versus like a Law 80 on the Royal Marines. They have an ASLF, which is a solid transport, but it's pretty mediocre. Last but not least, we have Territorials. 5+5 option, and in this case, this is wheeled. Keep in mind it only has 5 HP and with 1 armor. So 15 AP and the entire squad inside dies, right? When it comes to vehicles and transports, any overkill damage is directly transferred to the infantry inside. When it comes to helicopters, of course, there's also additional damage from the crash. Which is why pretty much only 15 HP squads can survive helicopter crashes. In this game, I should say. So keep this. This is why it's 5 points, right? Because it is only 5 HP. But it's a solid spam option for your deck. Support. Bison is wheeled mortar. A lot of people like it. I don't, because it only carries 90 rounds. And with the small caliber mortars, they fire much faster than the high caliber. The 90 isn't a lot, which is why I would always recommend, if you have the option, of course, to go for the British mortar. Those are also, oh yeah, there's also these mortars, but at this point, if you're going tracked, you might as well go for the 160 HE. Ammo mortar. If you really want wheels, Bison is an option, but it runs out of ammo so much faster, right? Wolverine. I love this, but it can also be very frustrating. It's very good, like very for the price. It's very good for the price. 12 rounds, non-radar, wheels. Javelin is fine. So Javelin is just a javelin, right? But it also fires 3 in a row before having to reload, which is worth pointing out. The problem is just don't try, even though it's kind of its role, do not, unless you really need to kill it. If you can, try to not like head on one go up against something like an Mi8 MTV. You will most of the time just lose. Which is why if you need to kill it, ideally try to like shoot at it from the side or from cover where it has to turn around or spot you first or something. Or just when it's out of ammo or etc. Right? The problem is just that in openers it will not consistently protect your other units from rocket pod helicopters. Right? However, given its chassis that's very fast, very mobile, and the fact that it's on radar and carries a lot of ammo, it is a very like cost-efficient way to decently protect an area throughout the game, like in the long run. Every now and then we'll maybe shoot a missile at the plane. If there's like a lone helicopter, we'll shoot that down. And all that for very cheap. And for that I love it. On the other, you just have to keep in mind, right? A Crotal for 60 points, you totally expect to like protect your opening column from like an MTV very consistently, right? But then you have to keep in mind that Wolverine is 35 points. It's almost like just 50% of a Crotal. Of course, it's gonna be significantly worse somewhere, right? And in this case, it's just the consistency within a single salvo, let's say, right? It makes up for that for being cheaper and also having 12 rounds. So if you have 2 of them, it's going to be a lot more consistent, but the issue is still going to be the range, right? So that's why it's funnily enough, not very good in openers, despite this seemingly being its role. In Unspec, it's hard to fit in, which is why for wheel openers, you're probably better off using SAS, because those you can unload in buildings or forests, and then they have cover at least. But in motor or something, it's so nice to have. I love it. Centurion Marksman is just a marksman. Same rate of fire as a Gepard. And the marksmen all have very good armor, but they're also very slow. Especially the Centurion Marksman. 35k mage is nothing. Which is why I'm not a huge fan of it. They also don't carry that much ammo. They run out much faster than the Gepard. I can show you. In fact, it can't even fire for an entire minute, right? Technically, the rate of fire is slower simply because they can't fire for an entire minute. Like, the salvo length is 68, which is their ammo, but if they fire all those 68 rounds, then you can't fire for the entire minute. I mean, to be fair, neither can the Gepard, but it can fire for longer throughout the minute, which is why in the armor tool the rate of fire is higher. But for specs or any ammo that essentially fires its entire magazine, only the shot reload basically matters, right? Which is an awkward thing because the marksmen tend to survive a lot more than the Gepard due to their armor, but they also have less ammo, which is a bit awkward. But it's again one of the many units that in Commonwealth is just very, very slow off-road. It's fine, it's solid, just slow, right? But the gun itself is perfectly fine. You will only survive when it comes to seed missiles the Super Cobra seed missile. Every other seed missile has 20 AP or more. Abbott is one of the 5HE howitzers. Again, 5HE howitzer, these shells do a lot more damage and have a much bigger splash than 5HE mortars, okay? They also only have 20 seconds aim time as opposed to 30 seconds aim time, which a lot of non-high-end artillery pieces have, which is very nice. If you go for one of those, go for the M108. It has a lot more ammo, so you need to almost never really reload it, or like resupply it. Abbott has more range, but you can just over deploy the M108 and then, you know, if you need more ammo, just merge it or resupply it once or twice and you're done. And very, very good for continuous fire. Again, one of these artillery pieces, 30 seconds aim time, not the greatest for the fire. In an awkward spot, it's not like it's a horrible unit in and of itself, there's just so many better options. Be it a high AS90, low-end M108s, or like the M110s, right? AS90, 10 seconds aim time artillery piece. Important thing, it fires 3-round bursts with a pretty broad shot reload, meaning these 3 rounds come out very, very fast, but then it has to reload for 30 seconds. That's a downside. Its continuous fire is not particularly high. In fact, it's quite low. But it makes up for that with the fact that these 3 rounds come out very, very fast after each other. So if your opponent only reacts like very, very late, it's unlikely that the follow-up shots will miss, right? It's solid, it's fine. Not as impactful as many other 10 seconds aim time artillery pieces, in my opinion. I used to really like it, but once you realize that, and that goes for every single howitzer, right? Every single howitzer has to reload 30 seconds for its salvo. Which means that the longer its salvo, assuming you don't have to fire a reload within the salvo longer than like 30 seconds. Looking at you, well, no, they have 15 seconds, but means that the shorter the salvo, you tend usually lower your overall rate of fire throughout the game. And I started to value the longer salvos more, like on paladins and such. This doesn't make it bad, it's just something to keep in mind when you use it, right? Falcon, it got, I think, its ammo count doubled, so it's not entirely horrible. It's an okay, like, base defense kind of spec if that's what you want. That's mainly its role. It's okay offensively, given non-radar against helicopters, but usually you have your SAS for that. Or your Stormer. Chief Marksman, like, all the marksmen have the same rate of fire, right? And they also all go up in speed and armor with each upgrade, right? And they're all 10 points apart. It's pretty neat, actually. Go from 35, 45, 55, and 50, 60, 70 points respectively. It's pretty funny. I think if you go for a marksman, you should either go for a Challenger or a Centurion. They're all fine. It's just that it's kind of odd that they're so survivable, but then they have so little ammo that, especially the Challenger marksman, it will run out all the time because it just won't die, and you can use it effectively against infantry as well, right? Kind of like a BMPT. But it just runs out of ammo so quickly. And that's actually its biggest downside, the Challenger marksman. For the other marksmen, it's mainly their speed, honestly. For the Challenger, it's really ammo count. There's only one seed missile that can one-shot it up front, and that's on the Feibao, the Chinese seed. You'd need at least 29 AP, and None of those are in game, but there's 130 AP missile in the game, seed missile, and that's on the Feibao. I mean, again, these are perfectly valid, perfectly solid, right? They're all a bit awkward. These because they're slow. This one is also not that fast, but then you're also paying 70 points for something that is just a solid spec. But for 70 points, you expect kind of more. The Gepard A2 for 65 points, for one, has more accuracy, but also has 8 stingers. The PGC 95 has even higher rate of fire and some non-radar missiles as well, right? This one has the armor, which is great, but usually that doesn't come as much into play, right? At least when you're talking about 15 armor. Like 6 armor is nice and all, but then you're kind of overpaying for armor in my mind. Because as its ammo count is so low, you can't really use it offensively as much. Plus, if you use it offensively, you have to be really careful that you're not engaging like a ground unit and then suddenly a plane comes by, right? It's the armor that you pay for just doesn't come as much into play. It's very often sort of a dead investment in my opinion. Because even if you want, and again, you can use it as an offensive unit, you still need to be careful. You get double tapped by 23 AP heat, or like a tank comes too close suddenly. When you lose a BMPT, that is of course also a big issue. It's for 60 points, filling a similar role. But usually, the BMPT is not like the only thing that can kill infantry or something around, whereas a Challenger Marksman might be your only anti-air piece. And if suddenly your only anti-air piece is gone, bam, suddenly a plane comes in, right? That's why it's a bit awkward. Oh no, wait, we had M110s, again, we went over those plenty of times. They're perfectly fine, perfectly solid. I think most people know how to use them. ADATs. There's nothing particularly special about this, except that it is an anti-air unit with medium ground optics. Ground optics 80. Let's just look at like a Leopard 2A1, which also has medium optics. Also ground optics 80, right? If you look at something like a Gepard, probably has only poor, but 60, right? Usually not a huge deal, except for helicopters, stealth helicopters, right? Because to counteract the stealth on helicopters, you actually need ground optics and not air detection. The other thing to keep in mind is those missiles are really, really fast. Like ground-based missiles, very, very fast. Other than that, you get what you see, right? It's a very strong unit. You can get a lot of value out of it. You can get a lot of kills with it, both aerial and ground-based. Also, one of the few 7H, if not the only. And I think the Sparta, the AMRAAM, the NASAMS as well. Very few 7HG missiles on Blue 4, because 7HG is essentially the cutoff where critical hits will reliably one-shot planes, which is why OSAS, for example, or the Tor, are actually quite nice for having 7HE. Also, you can one-shot up to 6HE helicopters, obviously. It's very, very strong, but also very expensive, right? So careful when you use it. The other thing to keep in mind is you can, similar when you use this offensively against ground units, can kind of bait this with ground units sometimes and then engage it with helicopters while this is busy shooting at ground units, right? Or having to re-aim at the air unit while after it killed the ground unit, right? Giving the helicopter additional time to get in range and potentially kill or stun this ADATs. And with only 8 shots, you also want to be careful. So yeah, that's a problem with this, right? Because Eugen doesn't give you a way to only disable the ground missiles. You can't really keep it very close to the front line most of the time, because you don't want to waste its missile. And you don't want to have to micro it against air units as well, right? Because it being non-radar and having not as much range versus planes, you don't want to waste precious time against that. That just makes it a bit awkward to use. So yeah, it's very flashy and can be very strong, but because of its awkwardness, it has hard to like get, again, similar to the marksman, Challenger Marksman, hard to get value out of it that you pay for, like the 110 points. M19s and such again, right motors. M270 MLRS, it's a solid cluster MLRS. When it comes to cluster MLRS, it's pretty much just are you the Smerge or I guess are you the LAR 160? If yes, you're good. If not, then you're probably not so great. It's not useless, especially in team games, right? Again, Battlefield 44 or Blood Rage 44s or what have you. Can be strong there. If you're playing a 1 versus 1 or let's say a quote-unquote normal 2v2, they're not useless or bad entirely, but it's hard to get consistent value out of these units, in my opinion. Stormer, very good. Almost a must-have. In fact, I would say it's a must-have. Having 60 missiles means that while also pretty weak anti-ground missiles, it's not as big of a deal if it uses one of those against ground units. It's much cheaper, so you're not as worried as much about trying to get the value out of it. And it's an incredibly strong against aerial units. That's of the same range or the same HE, but double the missiles. Still very good sets in general, and 75 points at good availability. It's mobile, it has 3 front armor. It's nice. It's good. It's great. The tracked rapiers, the 40-point ones, at least nowadays the rapiers have acceptable off-road speed. They used to be really slow. The 40-point ones, they're okay. They have good range versus helicopters. They fire all 8 missiles in a row. It goes for both of them. But they're squishy. Only 1 armor. They're not that fast. 55-point ones are in general better. Because for anti-helicopter, you use your Stormer, maybe your Wolverines or your Marksman, and your SAS, of course. And against planes, this is basically your only option, like your only dedicated anti-plane option. It's the only thing you have, really. Everything else is essentially mostly helicopter focused. But they're good at that. They will struggle against 2 armor planes. In general, Commonwealth struggles against those planes. But against everything else, like against every other plane, very cost efficient. Great accuracy, solid range, lots of missiles for 55 points. Very, very solid. Tanks. I think when it comes to, let's say, proper tanks, I don't think there's a single tank that's faster than 60 kmh. Again, I say proper because the exceptions are like the M41s and the Scorpions. And then you have like a 65kmh C2 and AS1 Plus and AS1. But after this, nothing, right? Centurions, slow. Challengers, the fastest is 60 kmh with the Challenger 2. Chieftains, the fastest is 45. And the Maxus is also only 60 kmh. There's essentially 2, let's say, proper tanks that are 60 kmh, everything else is slower. And you will notice that. Now the Centurions, 25.1 is actually kind of okay. It's like a fire support tank. But if you want a fire support tank, you're probably better off going for the M41A1. Very good for 10 points. And the really good off-road speed makes up for the fact that it only has 200 kilometers autonomy, which again is just a timer, not a distance. In game, not like in real life. Ace 1 is actually an interesting unit. And before we had the Recon Leopard for ANZAC, this was kind of sometimes, not always, sometimes used for the same purpose. Just for 35 points, you got medium optics, which is actually quite good. While obviously it doesn't make up for not having good or better optics and having no stealth, it was kind of fulfilling a similar role to like a, at least defensively, Recon tank-ish. AS1 Plus is solid. Can be used in like 4 stacks for 220 points to like close range bully tanks. Can definitely work. It's also just a bit matchup dependent, right, and situation dependent, but it's certainly a tank that you can even unspec just put in, right? Really punches up quite well for its price. Squishy, of course, being a Leopard 1, but it's quite good. Also a made-up unit apparently, because supposedly the Ace-1 Plus, the Plus was just like actually a training tank or something with like apparently Eugen, if I remember correctly, Eugen is like interpreted it as like getting better optics or like fancier firing control systems or something like that. But actually, the only thing that was installed was like a camera or something for tank training or something like that. Just really funny. Again, the other Centurions not really worth using because they're in price ranges where they just do the same thing but for more points, right? They die just as fast, and this is just a meme. Also, apparently, never existed, by the way. Challenger 1s, they're all fine. These days, the Mark II is probably the best. Mark III you probably want to use in team games to bolster up your heavy tank numbers. It's pretty good for that for 45 points, but slow. Alright, just keep that in mind. It's bad at like trying to run back into cover when you're fleeing from an incoming anti-tank plane. Other than that, pretty solid stats for its cost actually. Like good armor, good side armor. 8 RPM of course. They all have only 7 or 8 RPM. But especially the Mark 1 has very good armor for its price. For these days, for 10 points, getting the extra AP and accuracy and stabilizer is definitely worth it for 10 points. Availability is not a huge concern. You still get 7. Usually you're seeing these two being run, but sometimes you just see this run because the Chimera nowadays exists. Treasure 2, in a sense, arguably the best super heavy. Well, not anymore since the Bass exists, but does the Bass have 22 armor? I always forget. Does it have 22 or 23? It used to have 24. I should know this. I don't know why I don't know this. Yeah, it's 22. Okay. The only super heavy with 23 armor, which is why it's arguably the best, but it's also the only one with 60 kmh. Everything else is faster, I believe. Or is the Bass also only 60 kmh? No, it's also only 60 kmh. But the only one with 23, which means it's the only one that cannot get double tapped by kinetic weaponry. Not a huge deal, but worth pointing out. But it's also relatively clunky and slow. It's still very good though. It also means that tanks have bigger issues punching up, right? Lower tier tanks, some is gonna have a bigger issue getting into AP range, etc., like damaging range. Whereas having 22 instead of 23, or maybe even 24 compared to the M1A2 AP, usually not that big of a deal if you're trying to punch down. Yeah, very, very nice. Chieftains, I think the more expensive you go, the worse it actually kind of gets. The Mark 11, I tried it many, many times, right? You get lots of AP for the price. At 19 AP, 75 points, very strong. But as always, right, and I say this every time, the thing with these like high AP, low RPM tanks is you need speed. You need speed because that allows you to get into cover or out of range while you're reloading with your much lower rate of fire. Or just not allow tanks to run away while you're in close range. Something like that. But this tank doesn't have it, right? So it's shooting, and it's just a sitting duck while it reloads slower than pretty much any other medium tank in the game. That's basically it, right? The lower you get for the price point, the less of an issue it is, because then you have more tanks around, more targets, and one tank dying while the others are reloading, not that big of a deal. But speed is still annoying, right? It means you're gonna have trouble getting into range, getting past the forest to get in line of sight, etc., etc. It's annoying. The Mark V is possibly the best one. It's kind of like a T-72, T-72A-ish tank. While it doesn't have the medium optics or the 13 armor of a T-72A, 45 points, it's still quite tanky and has solid damage output to like essentially like an anti-IFV killer and such like that. So an anti-IFV tank, or an IFV killer, I should say. Leopard C1 is essentially a Leopard 1A4 with worse optics, not so great, probably just better off running the AS1. D2, kind of similar to the AS1 Plus, and it has quite damage for the cost. But now you pay 10 points for just 1 AP, and the armor is not that important. It's by no means a bad tank. It's essentially a Leopard 1A5 with 1 free AP, if you think about it. And it's fine. I think the AS1 Plus is a better tank. I like a better unit though. Maxos, on the other hand, it's one of the best medium tanks in the game. It doesn't quite pack a punch like the 120 and 125mm medium tanks in the game, but it does have the 10 RPM, which is really, really good. It's also not as expensive. It's like a 2A1 or an M84A. And 14 armor is still plenty. And 17 AP is also still very good. Definitely a must-have, I'd argue. Well, close to must-have. You could technically just run like an AS1 Plus and then have like a Challenger 1 next or something if you wanted to. I thought when we went over, Scorpion's not really worth using in my opinion. Scorpion 90 can be funny, I suppose. There's even medium optics. But that's about it. Still is only 2 armor for 30 points, and with no AMG, Pretty low RPM, not like the greatest AP. It's not worth using. Alright, Recon. Now, this is actually being recorded in a second session because my throat can't handle like 90 minutes of constant talking. Usually it's used to other things. No. Jokes aside, Recon. Up until recently, I definitely would have said the worst Recon tab out of all the coalitions, even quite a few major nations. Now with the Italy patch, because they got a new unit, I guess one could argue Scandi is worse. It also, of course, depends like how weak are other tabs in certain areas for this tab to feel weak as well. I think Scandi doesn't really have anything crazy, and yet it does. I think it never really feels particularly lacking. Now, why is this this tab for Commonwealth so bad? Well, there's a lot of straight up useless things. I mean, the Recon healers are fine, but here's the other thing. They have like 3 very good optics that are all whatever, right? The MI2 at least is something like 40 points. These are 50 points minimum, and the minigun is useless. The exceptional optics is actually fine, maybe even best exceptional optics helo in the game, if you purely want the optics. I'm not counting stuff like the Tiger or Longbow, of course, because it's 65 points and really fast. It's actually quite good. So in that regard, I guess it's a good Recon helo, but so many helicopters and not a single either Scout Defender or Gazelle-esque helicopter, which is cheap and has good optics with like very light weaponry. But also no like Tiger, Ninja, Aquila, Longbow, or even Kaiwa Warrior kind of deal. So that's unfortunate. I'm just gonna go here tab by tab. I think that's easier to do, at least in this case. Recon Infantry. The shock are one of the worst shocks in the game. They only have a basic law and a basic MG. Again, I said it every time. I think for Recon Infantry, the majority of Recon Infantry at least, the most important weaponry is the AT weapon, because usually you're not using them in like main infantry fights. And while it is nice to have decent anti-infantry capabilities, don't get me wrong, usually the main opponents are going to be vehicles, either because they're sneaking around and trying to, be cheeky in the flanks or behind enemy lines, or because when they're being tried to get flushed out, right? Because they're in an important position, the opponent wants to get rid of them. They don't know exactly where they are, or they don't have artillery, so they have to use vehicles. Sometimes they either send their own Recon vehicles or 5-pointer spam. And in that case, the AT weapon becomes very, very important. And the law is pretty much the worst you could get. I think out of all, compared to all Recon infantry at least. And the other weaponry doesn't really make up for that either. The only one that is arguably worse, in my opinion at least, are the JSDF Rangers, because they also have the law and the sniper instead. Primary weapon, I'm not sure if they're a battle rifle or assault rifle, but not that important. They have at least a Kyoroku WIPC. Transport-wise, there's also nothing. They don't even get a Lynx H7 to like give you a 6 or 7 per card Lynx H7 in the Recon tab or something. The Spartan is fine, but it's only tracked, right? It's not like all of the other Recon infantry transports that are wheeled. There's nothing really going on for them. Norforce, I mean, look, they're not great, but they're line Recon infantry, right? So you're not expecting a whole lot, but also nothing crazy in terms of transports. NZSAS and Pathfinders, they kind of fill a similar role in that they're okay if you need like special forces that can infantry grind, and in some decks you might use Pathfinders specifically for that role, because they're special forces for only 25 points, which are usually very cost effective for grinding in towns. Now, and one of the best MG, at least they have the C2O and not the Bren, so they have 50 and not 40% accuracy. They have a carbine which helps. These guys on the other hand have an SMG. They're both sometimes, either one is sometimes used in Modo, like 2 cards of specifically for town grinding, because the infantry tab has commandos, but sometimes you really want special forces, but not use it often. I think Pathfinders, if you see them, you mostly see them used in NORAD Modo, honestly. It's probably the deck where they see the most use. Also, probably a better option than Delta Force for town grinding. Plus, you get a 2-armor transport. Other than that, you don't really see them being used. Outside of like maybe, Anzac or something. Recce, I mean, they're your two-man sniper team. One thing to keep in mind is they're only 25 kmh because they're shock and not elite, making them slower than pretty much any other two-man sniper team. And of course, they don't have 3 weapons, they don't have 2, and they get a kinetic sniper rifle with extra range, which is funny and all, but it's like a neat, funny little gimmick. Nothing really crazy. You can, of course, do some funny stuff with this, right? Especially cheap CVs, you gotta get like, let me do the math, like at 12, 25 meters range, you will one-shot 5 HP, 0 armor vehicles, which is cool and all, but other than that, this is, yeah, like I said, mainly a gimmick. Because you don't, many times you don't even want to shoot them because you want them to be sneaky and spot and not give their position away. In SBS, they're probably your most used Recon Infantry in here. They're the only ones with a decent AT weapon. They have the Bren, which is not great. They have an SMG, which is fine. But they also get a Lynx H7, right? So that's very common card you see. And in general, they're probably your best Recon Infantry in here. And they're not great particularly. But it's the best you have, really. Recon vehicles. I don't like exceptional optics Recon vehicles. Like stuff like this is just dedicated exceptional optics. I think it's a waste of a card most of the time. Low availability, expensive, and it gets spotted itself pretty easily. So I wouldn't ever recommend using stuff like this. I mean, these are just whatever, right? I hope I don't need to explain that to you. Cougar Recon. There's some funny stuff you can do with this. Keep in mind that 10 AP is just enough to double tap 2 armor, and of course one shot 1 armor. But it has low accuracy, low rate of fire, no HE, right? So even in like a secondary fire support kind of role, it's not very great. And no stabilizer either, so you can't really use this consistently, at least, to protect like weird pushes. If you get really lucky, of course, and hit a lot of your shots, yeah, they can do work, and they will one-shot, for example, KTs, as they have only 1 armor. But realistically, they're not really a counter. Coyote, late Bushmaster, and Bushmaster got a buff. But it's very good optics, and that increases its price and lowers its availability, right? So for 45 points, it's not a bad unit, but not really a very great frontline unit for its cost, right? It does have 2 armor, which LAVs don't, but just a bit on the expensive side. Aslev, it was already good before, now it's very good in my opinion. Obviously only 1 armor, but good autonomy, good speed, and the Bushmaster got a buff and 25 points, very, very nice. 1-on-1, of course, it doesn't stand a chance against the likes of Hachinanas or BRDM3s, mainly, or most importantly, because they have more than 1 armor. And the difference between 1 and 2 armor matters a lot for AP, or anything, really. But it's also very cheap, or cheaper than those. You can just flood the field. Scorpion is actually kind of okay. Now, it does have the exact same gun as a Cougar Recon, but it has 2 armor. It's a lot more resilient against similar vehicles shooting back, right? And that helps a lot. But there's one better option with the same weapon that I've used before. It's probably still kind of okay. But that being said, it's still not an amazing unit. Scimitar is also kind of okay, actually. Now, I've said before, the Razzmann is absolutely horrible, but this thing is also only 15 points, right? So you can kind of use this as like base defense because it can shoot at helicopters. But it still has low rate of fire and the lower accuracy than the other warriors with only 35%. So it's not amazing, but it's also only 15 points, right? With good autonomy as well. So it's not like it's gonna arrive at the front line and have to stay there. So it can be decent. I think its main downside is its low availability. And I think unlike the M41A1 that used to be 10 points with the same availability, it's still lacking. You can use it, I think it's fine. It's hard to fit in, and it doesn't really fill a proper role, in my opinion. Fox, at least, is weird, but you're just better off using the Aslav. 5 points for better autocannon, but also just a stabilizer on a weird chassis. Very huge, very, very huge. Okay, Ferret is funny. Real voice reveal. It's a stealth Recon ATGM, right? Which is good. And the unit itself is fine. But it's also incredibly inconsistent. It also has only 300 kilometers autonomy, so it has trouble repositioning, which will happen. As in, which you running out of fuel will happen. The missile, as you can see, is not the fastest. I think it's the Milan speed. Yep. So it's basically a Milan 2 with less AP, but more range, which is good. Range is great. But it's just inconsistent. That's the main thing. It's again not a bad unit, but you can't rely on it. There are also only 6 missiles. It can fire 2 in a row, but it will run out relatively quickly. And it doesn't have like a backup autocannon. It also has no armor. It's literally just a hit and miss unit. Sometimes it can do really well, and other times it just won't do anything. Okay, Jeeps and more useless stuff here. This is a similar thing to the not a scimitar, the Scorpion, but just with 1 extra armor. You're a bit slower, and have a bit worse autonomy, or a good chunk, but still good enough. But 3 armor is really nice, especially against autocannons and such. That extra armor helps a lot. I've used this a lot, especially in the past before the AS1 Recce was a thing. It does its job decently. And it's not great, but it's also only 20 points. But the range you get for 20 points is really good. And then this thing, of course, which is new. A very interesting kind of. It's basically a Leopard AS1, but you get the modern AP from like 1995, right? Based on like post 90 years, 105mm guns get extra AP. So really high AP, but they also like range type, right? So practically, it's like firing a 15 AP 15 AP gun at full range. Or like a full range gun with 15 AP at 1925 meters, right? It's good. It's fine. I think it's not just another this makes the CTQ-62G tank obsolete. I think it is in a decent spot where it's not on the same level as the Vercanning, CTQ, or PSV. Not even talking about the M84AN. At the same time, not like a trash Recon tank like a Base Leopard 1 or a T-55 Ace and such. I think it's like in between, which is a decent spot. It fills a good role. It's not like ridiculously strong, especially because of the lack of range, right? It really holds the tank back, and I think that's good. Not the best accuracy and stabilizer either. I think it's good. It's must have simply because the rest of the vehicles are so mediocre at best, except for the Aslav. It's cheap enough where you can use multiples of it in the front line without feeling like you have to pay for an arm and a leg, but also strong enough on its own that a single one can really help a lot. I think it's in a really good spot. Vehicles. Definitely one of the coalitions with one of the best, arguably the best vehicle type, at least when it comes to the amount of great vehicles, right? Which makes playing mech with this deck really, really fun. Since mech nowadays gives veterans bonus 2 vet steps to the vehicle tab. SF just as good as the Recon variant, really. It's cheaper, but you lose optics and stealth, which is fine, right? Really, really good for wheeled openers now. The increased rate of fire. SF 2 has always been decent, still is decent. Only 4-2, so you kind of have to micro it a bit, but it's also only 45 points, which is really affordable, especially given the fact that it's fast, has at least some armor, or at least 10 HP. You know, when you compare this to 2 Jeeps, which are at a similar price point, and gets a Bushmaster, a late Bushmaster even, which you want to be careful because you have only 1 armor, but it's at least like a backup option. Aviary is obviously like a boom nuke against infantry. Great to have always. Just very, very slow. Keep that in mind. Chimera, my beloved. These days I use this instead of a medium tank, right? The main comparison obviously would be the Challenger 1 line. It is a lot more comparable to the Challenger 1 Mark II. And you have 1 extra front armor, 2 extra side armor, but you lose a stabilizer. And you also lose optics. Now, is that worth it? Realistically, probably not. But then, for example, Mech, of course, gets veterancy in here. which is really good. Putting this on veteran instead of trained down vetted, right? Not up vetted, train veteran, down vetted veteran. Also is 4 AG, which it didn't always have. It's great. And one thing to keep in mind is all these. I think I hopefully I showed this with the Scandi overview. It helps at least a bit, right? The no turret tanks have a very fast turn time of their hull, right? If you want to reverse them or like turn them 90 degrees, they turn really fast, right? The temps demi-tour, which is really low. 3 is like almost the lowest you can essentially get compared to any other tank. And challengers are actually slower than most tanks. Like level 2, I think, has 4 or 5. Even has 4, right? Which is still fast. And the Challenger has 6. Challenger 2 has 5, right? And that is something to keep in mind, which not a lot of people know. Also, really good acceleration. Doesn't have that much, but it's worth pointing out. So there's some things to mitigate the fact that it has no turret that are not shown on the set card. But yeah, it's just a wall, right? It's a lot weaker offensively than like a Challenger, of course. But it comes in a vehicle type and it has extra armor. It's a wall. It has like great armor for the price. I just love it. I fully admit that yes, it's probably better to use a Challenger 1 Mark II, assuming they cost the same activation points in your deck. But I still love it to death, man. Cougars actually like the Recon variant, but you don't get a price discount. So it's even worse. That thing used to have a stabilizer. I wonder how many people noticed. That was a funny little thing. It's obviously horrible, right? Really slow, really low range missile. Don't bother with this. Vickers, very great, of course. Very good. Pairs very well with the Aslav, right? When the Vickers shoots at something and gets it down to like 1 or 2 HP, Aslav finishes it off, so that's nice. Incredibly fast, high AP, full range, great stabilizer, decent rate of fire, and 2 armor. Yeah, I mean, what more can you ask for, right? Kind of a must-have. Something really nice to do with them is just getting like a 3 or 4 stick of them, being a menace on one front, and then moving them very quickly to the other side of the map. Very nice. Very nice. Great autonomy as well. I don't know if they still do, but they used to have voice lines for transports. Because I think Eugen considered for a while to use them as a transport in the game, which is funny. Striker's actually kind of okay. It's the same missile as on the Ferret, so it's not the fastest. But it has kind of like the BVP Polo. 3 front armor, so at max range, you need 21 AP on a kinetic gun to one-shot this, which is good. And it carries a lot of ammo. Has reload only after firing 5 missiles. And in mech, when it's on veteran or even elite, it's a lot more consistent, right? And with 40 points, it's not that expensive. It has a lot of missiles, so you don't have to worry about microing it. Just set it and forget it, really. Rarden, same issue as the Recon type Scimitar for the same price and even worse speed. So not really worth using, even in mech, in my opinion. I mean, hope I don't need to explain why this is bad. The Jeeps, if you use the Jeeps, Ridiculous Rifle obviously use the Rover Wombats. The Brits also get them. The best Ridiculous Rifle Jeep in the game, really, because for 10 points, they're the only ones with 19-25 meters range, which is really good. And they also have good off-road speed, right, with 80 km/h. So yeah, and extra AP as well. Out of all the Ridiculous Rifle Jeeps, best ones. ATGM Jeeps, I mean, they're ATGM Jeeps. If you want to use any of them, I usually recommend the TOW 2, but what is it, 5 points more, you get the Aslav TOW 2, right? Which is just so much better, offers so much more. LAV 2 and M113 2, they carry a lot more ammo than the Aslav TOW 2, but I still think this was a better investment. And that's that they have both 2 armor, so they're a lot more resilient to like low AP guns. And they both have to fire, can fire twice before having to reload, which is good. No real reason for this to like be used when you have the rover wombat, honestly. The speed is a lot more helpful. And you just have the wombat gun, right, with more range. The 1 armor and 10 HP aren't really a huge deal most of the time. Speed is a lot more valuable. This is kind of okay, but then for 10 points more you get the Tutu, right? And it has the issue, it has a reload after every missile, and it has only 1 armor. Yeah. I just don't know, man. Don't use this M113 FSV, please. It's just bad. M113 Milan, which is the unit that Anza got when all the non-Eastern Bloc and non-Scandi decks got a free unit for like a celebration DLC. US got a Patriot, Germany got a Martyr too, right? All really cool stuff. And Anza got the M113 Milan, which is why later on they got the Vickers with the Scandi DLC to make up for what a horrible unit they got. And it was really funny. Canada got the Wolverine. What did UK get again? Completely forgot about what UK got. What did UK get? Ooh, now I'm wondering what they got. I don't remember. Now I'm really curious because it wasn't a Stormer, I'm pretty sure. Nothing in the tank tab. Genuinely don't remember. They must have gotten something. Huh. I'll have to look this up later. Yeah, and then of course more rovers, whatever. Helicopters. Honestly, personally, I think this is a weaker helicopter tab than Scandi. Because the Fennec's are just so good, and in this, there's nothing really amazing here. This is a worse Fennec 20mm because it is bigger. I think the guns might have worse stats. Maybe they don't, I'm not sure. It's still a decent helicopter, admittedly, right? And you have base tow. Honestly, if they had an ITO variant for 55, that'd be really good. Because the TOW 2 is just a tad expensive for what it does. And the Lynx 3, again, same, right? It has great armaments, don't get me wrong, but with 6 HP only, it gets so quickly one-shot, right? Strelatons, Crotals, most importantly, right? And then even Iglas with the crit can one-shot you, or Manpads, right? No gun either, no armor, so small arms will also just annihilate you really fast. Just a really, really sad helicopter. This is a meme, don't use this. This is kind of okay, but usually you just have Lynx H7s in your deck that fill their same role and are better at that, right? More rocket pods and much, much faster. Then you have these heat rocket pods. Now, don't get me wrong. They're not great. Simply because getting them to fire at a valuable target is so difficult because they're slow and so easy to kill and they have low range. However, they're heat at the end of the day. So every single rocket pod that hits the target will deal at least 1 damage. If it's assuming it's a vehicle, of course, right? You can't fire precision with this or fire infantry. And I have, maybe you remember, I played a 10v10. It might have been on stream, I don't remember. I played a 10v10 on Nuclear Winter's Coming and had a Moderna. It's a low income 10v10, right? Moderna was one of the very few units I had. I was pushing with it, and suddenly I saw like 3 helicopters pop up behind the forest and just annihilate this. Lo and behold, those were rocket helicopters. It was an amazing moment, and they can be really fun to use. Now, if you just want to hope to get these high dopamine moments, they're one of the best units to get those moments with. It's just gonna be like really, it's hard to really get consistently results with them, but the moment you do, it feels so good because it's so funny. They're so funny. Not great, but high aura unit, let's put it that way. Alright, the R-Tab. Skyhawk is actually kind of not too horrible. It either needs to be a bit cheaper or faster, but like 3 per card with 2 missiles that reload really fast is actually not too horrible. Relatively cheap. Just send it and forget it. It's just gonna die very easily. I think it was like 900 kmh with that with 0% ECM. It would be actually pretty solid. Kahu, of course, is just an uber tank leader. High accuracy, high ape, like double tapping any tank. Decent ECM. It's just slow, so the enemy will see it coming from miles away, which is his major downside, but it's fine. It's fine. Not a must-have, but still used a lot for a good reason. This is just bad. This has a good payload, but a horrible chassis. It's the whole good old. It's the same thing with napalm planes, man. Main role of this is to very cheaply detect helicopter openers really fast. That's really the only role this has. Just send this out into the enemy, especially in team games and something, and just see if you spot helicopters coming in. That's all it has to do, or all it's good for, really. Yeah, incredibly low accuracy, no ECM, incredibly low range as well. It has really nothing going for it, other than its cheap price and speed for the price, right? So that's why it's basically just a scout plane, so to speak. A very good time over target as well for that, by the way. Starfighter, a decent rocket pod plane, especially now that it's 1000 kmh. Great rocket pods, by the way. Very good accuracy, that helps a lot. And like a secondary helo hunter, which Commonwealth usually struggles with because a lot of their good planes aren't multi-role, right? A lot of the times, many coalitions have like bombers or ATGM planes that also have short-range missiles. Like Czech MiG-29 is like a perfect example, or the Peace Rhine, or the Hornet, right? So if you need like an emergency helo hunter because there's like a helo in your base or something, and you already have the plane available, you can just send it out, right? With the Kahu, and as we'll see with the F-111, that is not the case. So that is something that you sometimes want to keep in mind. They also don't have a great dedicated helo hunter like a Lazur or an L-17K. So I found myself very often in a situation where the only plane with short range missiles was like my high-end ASF or something, and I didn't have it bought yet. But I bought like plenty of other planes. Blue Dragons sometimes faces a similar issue, by the way. But that's something to keep in mind. That usually your dedicated helo hunters in Commonwealth are like multi-role planes like the Starfighter. Freedom Fighter is an interesting plane. Incredibly good payload for the price, right? Compared to the J7C, which is also 70 points, but only carries 2 bombs. However, that plane is also faster and has a short-range missile, so yeah. But sometimes you play like Canada National, you get like lots of them. It's really fun to spam out. I also get 2 cards, which helps with that a lot. Because it can, if you catch your opponent in a situations where they have no AA around or their AA is empty, then you can just send plane after plane and they reload so fast. This is sometimes used specifically because it's like an anti-tank plane with short-range missiles. It's fine. It's not like the best cluster plane having only 8 and not like the usual 12 bombs with like these top-tier cluster planes. But it also has 30% ECM, and like I said, AIM-9Ms, very good short-range missiles. So, prime like a utility plane, I think is what I'd call it, right? It's not gonna fill the role of your main tank killer. It's not gonna fill the role of like your super dedicated helo hunter, right? But it helps with both. It's good in some. It's like, yeah, it's just solid to have, while not like properly filling like a dedicated role. One of your 3 available, honestly, high vet tuber card ASFs, probably the most used one out of all the ASFs available. Has 5-6 HE respectively, so that's good. So either combination of 2 hits will, or any combination with 2 hits will kill a plane. That's very nice. Yeah, it's pretty solid. Nothing much more to say. One of your 2 seat options. Both seats have the downside. I'm just gonna compare them directly. I think it's the best way to go for it. I'm a huge proponent of stealth on seaplanes. Helps a lot. On the other hand, right, the Voodoo, like for 90 points, on the one hand is amazing, right? It has stealth, it's fast, and has 50% ECM at 90 points, right? It also is one of the worst seat missiles, and comes on rookie and super card. So it will constantly miss. And as a result, just die, right? Because if it doesn't kill the radar AA and the opponent didn't pay attention to it because, you fired your Shrike, then you might just die. On the other hand, like I said, it's 90 points, man. It's steal. These days, though, I use the Sea Harrier. It has no stealth. It is also slower, but it has more range on the missile and 70% base accuracy. It has lower ECM, but it can also, because it's slower and has still a decent turn radius, it can stay out of range more easily because it can fire earlier, right? So you can turn earlier. And the extra range helps to somewhat mitigate the lack of stealth and speed. Still, you won't catch your opponent off guard as much as you would with the Voodoo. But I see here also has the additional utility of having short-range missiles, right? Which is a secondary reason as to why I use the Sea Harrier these days. Voodoo is still fine, but both are certainly not top tier seaplanes. Your fighter is your standard super high-end ASF, right? It's basically a Sea Eagle with better turn radius but a worse gun. There you go. F111 C, one of the best bombers in the game. That's all that needs to be said. Incredibly good payload. It used to be, of course, if you remember, in the very, very early days of Wargame, 8 of these bombs, right? It just annihilated everything. But it also was only 1 per card, and also had only 10% ECM. To buff this and buff Commonwealth, which was honestly a very good decision, it got reduced to 4 bombs, which meant that for some reason it could carry better and countermeasures and whatnot, increasing its ECM and also being 2 per card. Just for raw bombing, arguably the best bomber card in the game. Phantom is not that great, honestly. Really low accuracy. Low ECM, of course, for 90 points, but also only on hardened, right? If you got Recon, Veteran, or even Elite, I think it would be worth using, but low base accuracy, not even coming on Veteran, let alone Elite. Hornet is basically an IDS, but with a better gun. I think the IDS might only carry 2 AIM-9s, I don't remember. But yeah, no real reason to use this unless you want an AG bomber with short-range missiles. F111 is just so much better. Harrier lineup. Okay. Oh my god, my voice. One thing to keep in mind is the GR1 is slower than the other Harriers, right? These are all 750. This one is 600. That is a big deal. However, if you've seen one of my Marine videos or something, it was this is 5 per card. It's a great amazing payload for 50 points. So if you can spam this out and get them out safely because you protect them or because your opponent is getting bullied and has no ECM, it can be quite a pain train. Send these out. 5 per card is really good. You get 2 cards even. There's definitely some meme stuff you can do with this. GR3 is your alternative, Hero Hunter / Rocket Pod multi-role. Worse rocket pods. However, you have better short-range missiles. Lower speed also sometimes helps to line up against helos when trying to dive down. It's a preference thing, really, if you want to use either of them. GR5, same payload as the Hornet. Same short-range missiles, although fewer, but 40% ECM. Actually not that horrible. Still just never really seen because the F111 exists. But actually kind of okay, believe it or not. I think if it was 3 per card, which might be a bit much, you might see this a lot more. It's 40% ECM as well. I think this is kind of just, the more I look at it, the more I'm like, yeah, it's actually kind of a good plane. GR7, your other main anti-tank plane, really. It's less consistent. It's still pretty good and pretty good ECM. Also, again, secondary Helo Hunter. But laser guard bombs are of course great. Just keep in mind, never bother firing using this with fire position unless you lost line of sight in the last second and just want to get rid of your payload or something. But usually it's still better off just evacing and not having to have the reload downtime. What you can do though is actually get a 4-way split. If you have 4 very light armor targets or low value targets, you just split them 4 ways. It's a bit micro intensive and hard to do, but can be really fun and rewarding because it looks cool. It will consistently one-shot, I think, 3 top armor planes, assuming the laser guard bombs hit top armor, right? And none of them miss. The other thing to keep in mind is, even if you don't hit, or if only one of them hits, or you just barely miss, they will instantly stun and panic pretty much any tank, right? That's one thing I think that sometimes people underutilize or underappreciate about these laser guided bombs. Tier 1 is still okay, right? It used to be really busted when it was like 5 per card or something, or 4 per card. It got nerfed with Italy, deservingly so, because it was actually disgusting. It's really fast, it has 20% ECM. Sure, it only has 2 cluster bombs, right? But sometimes you don't realize that not a lot of all these, out of all these like 12 cluster bombers, only a few of them only ever hit, right? And these are close together, so if both of them hit, you still did a lot of damage. It was a disgusting cluster plane, honestly, because for the price it was also really fast and decent survivable. It had decent survivability. It's still fine. Probably better used in the UK, where you hopefully get 4 of them. Tier 1A is fine. Not used long these days. It was used decent track in the past, right? Because for the price, it's again good ECM and speed. 2 on the elite with 230 AP missiles, right? Sometimes it has trouble getting both missiles off in the same run against a target, especially if it's flying towards a Jaguar, thus reducing the time that you can dive down. It's also not the most consistent. While it comes to elite, 40% base accuracy is not the best. But it's also an option because it's a heat missile that is fast, unlike the Kahu. And unlike the GR7, it's a heat missile. Don't bother with this. That's all I have to say. This is kind of a similar thing to the Phantom, but at least it comes on Veteran. Main thing holding this back is it only has 1 semi-active missile here. Also pretty low range. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend using this. I think if you want like 2 cards of ASFs, I don't think the Phantom or the Mirage 3 are really worth it. Having only 1 missile is really bad. The low range is really annoying too. No ECM as well. Doesn't have a lot going for it. You went over this as well. This is your quote-unquote dedicated healer hunter, but it's not very good. Not great ECM, not the speed of like an L17 or Lazur. Only 1 set of missiles. Not the best set of missiles. You know, it's not it's not the best accuracy on a gun, which is actually important. Not really worth using, right? If you would run 3 on Veteran, presumably, in which case, just like, GR3 on Trained, right? Tornadoes, both of them are your other option for like your 2 per card ASFs. This is just like the Horn that comes on Veteran. In this case, downside is your short-range missiles are a good chunk worse, less accuracy, but also only 4 HE. So 2 of them hitting will not kill a plane. You have, however, 10% more ECM, which is really nice. And your medium-range missiles have more range, which is also neat. So most people still prefer the Hornet. It's better for killing. Tornado 3 is just a bit more forgiving when it comes to driving. And then the F2 is basically the same with less ECM. And a bit less range on the missile here, right? On Sky Flash. Pretty much the only difference between these two. But you're also on the lead, right? So if suddenly you gain the accuracy again, in case you're wondering, on the 50% missile, the difference between Veteran or lead is 7%, right? On Veteran, it translates to 66%. On the lead, you have 73% on those 50% missiles. 60% on Veteran, by the way, translates to 76% accuracy. So the F2 actually has more accuracy on the long range, a good chunk more accuracy on the medium range missiles than the Hornet, and only loses 3% on the medium range missiles, practically speaking. It's just worth pointing out. I think the Tornado 2 is a bit underappreciated. And then with the GR1, which kind of fills a similar role to the Hornet here, in which case it's kind of a support plane. It has fewer cluster bombs, but they're bigger. Something very important to keep in mind. For some reason, it has more AP than the other BL755. I wouldn't know. I guess it's the eye doing something. So Yeah, it's fine. I just think the Hornet is better. That's all there is to it. But it's still fine. It does the same thing, really. I'm just fewer classic bombs. I prefer the Hornet, but you do you. Better short-range missiles versus better bombs, but fewer. But do you want better fewer bombs or more worse? I don't know. Up to you. Both are good. So yeah, those are the Commonwealth units. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. And I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Bye bye.